The earliest known writing appears on small clay tablets found in southern Mesopotamia, stacked in storage rooms, handled daily, and kept near goods, not temples of worship or places of storytelling. Welcome to History and Society, where history is explained through the systems of money, belief, power, and ideas that shape civilization. These tablets carry simple marks pressed into wet clay, repeated again and again, forming patterns meant to be read quickly, checked often, and compared with physical objects stored nearby. Many people assume writing emerged to express ideas or preserve culture. That assumption fails immediately, because the earliest writing does neither. It appears where tracking goods and obligations became unavoidable. If writing were created for expression, we would expect stories, prayers, or names. Instead, we find counts and categories, suggesting writing began as a tool to solve a practical coordination problem. Before writing, small communities relied on memory and trust. People knew who owed what, who worked where, and who contributed. These systems functioned only while groups remained limited in size. As settlements grew, memory became unreliable. Exchanges stretched over weeks, goods moved between locations, and decisions involved people who were not present at the moment of action. At that scale, spoken agreements stopped working. Disputes increased, shortages appeared, and accountability weakened, not because people changed, but because the system exceeded human recall. The problem was not leadership or belief. The problem was coordination over time. Someone needed to remember, compare, and verify actions long after they occurred. Writing solved this by moving memory out of people and into objects. Once marks could hold information, obligations no longer depended on personal presence or repeated explanation. The first pressure came from surplus. Grain stored after harvest needed monitoring over months, not days, creating a gap between production and use that memory alone could not reliably manage. Once goods stayed in one place while people moved elsewhere, coordination broke down. Someone had to know what entered storage, what left, and what remained without relying on constant presence. Labor created a second problem. Workers contributed effort at different times, often receiving food later, requiring a way to connect past work with future distribution accurately. Exchange across distance added another strain. Livestock, tools, and grain moved between settlements, increasing delay and uncertainty, making spoken agreements harder to track and easier to dispute. As these pressures combined, trust alone became insufficient, not because trust disappeared, but because it could not scale across time, distance, and growing numbers of participants. What was needed was not authority, but continuity. The system required a way for yesterday's actions to remain visible and enforceable today and tomorrow. Writing provided the continuity by fixing information outside the human mind. Marks on clay could be checked repeatedly without changing, unlike spoken memory or personal testimony. Once information became fixed, comparison became possible. Past deliveries could be matched against present claims, reducing uncertainty and limiting disputes without constant negotiation. Writing also forced standard categories. Grain had to be measured the same way each time. Workers counted in repeatable units, and goods grouped consistently to remain comparable. These standards did not reflect culture or belief. They reflected necessity. Without shared measures, records lost meaning, and coordination failed again. With records in place, decisions no longer depended on who remembered best. They depended on what was written, shifting control from individuals to processes. This change allowed roles to stabilize. One person recorded, another checked, another distributed, each guided by marks rather than personal negotiation. Over time, these repeated actions formed routines. The routine mattered more than the person performing it, making replacement possible without disruption. At this point, something new existed, a system that could operate daily without constant direction, relying on records to coordinate people, goods, and time. This is where government begins. Not with rulers or commands, but with recorded obligations that persist beyond individual memory and personal presence. Before rulers appear in the record, rooms do. Storage rooms, counting areas, and workspaces appear repeatedly, indicating that coordination was organized around places and functions, not personal authority. These rooms required people assigned to specific tasks. Someone counted incoming goods, someone updated records, and someone oversaw distribution, forming early roles defined by action rather than status. The power of these roles came from access to records. Whoever controlled the tablets controlled verification, making written information more influential than physical strength or personal persuasion. Because records endured, decisions could be reviewed. Past actions constrained present choices, limiting arbitrary change and creating predictable outcomes for those dependent on the system. This predictability encouraged participation. Workers and suppliers could rely on delayed return, knowing their contribution would remain visible even after they left. At no point was force required to make the system function daily. Compliance emerged from dependence on distribution, not fear of punishment. Over time, these routines demanded oversight. Someone ensured records matched reality, creating early supervision rooted in checking consistency rather than issuing demands. As records accumulated, archives formed. Tablets were stored, retrieved, and reused, allowing decisions to reference weeks or years of past activity. This accumulation produced continuity across seasons. The system did not reset after each harvest, but carried obligations forward, stabilizing planning and expectation. People began interacting with the system instead of individuals. They delivered goods to storage, received rations by record, and worked according to assignment rather than personal agreement. At this stage, authority existed without rulers. Control operated through procedure, with records guiding outcomes more reliably than spoken instruction. Leadership, when it later appeared, entered an already functioning structure. Rulers did not invent coordination, they inherited and directed it. This explains why early leadership titles appear after extensive record-keeping. Writing solved organization first, leaving command as a secondary layer. Government, then, is not defined by who rules. It is defined by how actions are tracked, verified, and repeated across time. Once that mechanism exists, power becomes durable. It survives turnover, conflict, and absence, because it rests on records, not personalities. In Mesopotamia, tablets list daily grain rations issued to workers, recorded by name, quantity, and date, showing distribution depended on records rather than personal supervision. Livestock counts appear repeatedly, tracking animals over time. Losses, births, and transfers were recorded, allowing accountability even when caretakers changed. Standard measures appear across tablets. Units for grain and weight remain consistent, indicating coordination depended on shared reference rather than local interpretation. These records appear in temples not as religious texts, but as operational centers where goods entered, moved, and exited under written control. The temple functioned as a hub, not of worship alone, but of storage, labor allocation, and redistribution guided by tablets. Workers listed on tablets often received food later than their labor, proving writing connected actions separated by time, without direct oversight. Disputes could be resolved by reference to records. What was written mattered more than recollection, shifting trust from people to documentation. Because tablets endured, mistakes became visible. Errors could be corrected, patterns detected, and future planning adjusted based on accumulated information. This allowed forecasting. Administrators could estimate needs, anticipate shortages, and adjust assignments before failure occurred. No single tablet created control. Control emerged from repeated recording, checking, and updating performed daily by different individuals. This repetition reduced reliance on exceptional individuals. The system worked even when experienced people were replaced or absent. As generations passed, newcomers learned procedures rather than personal histories, allowing continuity beyond living memory. At this point, the system had its own momentum. Participation became necessary for survival, binding individuals to recorded processes. Force remained secondary. Compliance followed from dependence on distribution networks maintained by records, not from constant coercion. Mesopotamian government, therefore, appears first as an administrative fact, visible in tablets long before it appears as political theory or ideology. Once writing anchored coordination, authority could extend beyond immediate presence. Decisions made earlier continued to shape outcomes even when the original decision-makers were no longer involved. This allowed control to stretch across distance. Goods moved between locations while remaining legible to the system, through records carried or stored elsewhere. Time also expanded. Obligations survived seasons and years, allowing planning that exceeded a single harvest or labor cycle. With continuity secured, rules could stabilize. Expectations became predictable because past actions constrained future behavior through recorded reference. Only after this stability did formal commands appear. Laws and decrees relied on existing record systems to function, rather than creating order on their own. This sequence matters. Writing did not decorate authority. It made authority workable by giving it memory, reach, and consistency. Government, then, is not born from force or belief. It forms when obligations can be tracked, verified, and enforced beyond personal memory. Writing is the tool that makes this possible. It converts fragile human recall into durable institutional memory. Where records accumulate, coordination deepens. Where coordination deepens, governance emerges regardless of who holds power. This pattern appears repeatedly across civilizations. The details change, but the sequence remains consistent. States grow where records grow. Collapse follows when record-keeping fails, fragments, or loses authority. Seen this way, government is less a ruling structure than a system for managing scale through recorded obligation. Ancient Mesopotamia shows this clearly because its earliest writing survives, preserving the mechanism in physical form. Writing did not reflect government already in place. It created the conditions that made government unavoidable. If this explanation clarified how systems form, subscribe to History and Society, and enable notifications to follow future episodes examining how similar mechanisms shape civilizations over time.